Hey everybody, this is Dr. Dan, and this week we are going to talk about RCA and David Sarnoff. Last week we talked about Henry Ford, the beginnings of the modern manufacturing and the automobile. This week we're going to talk about RCA, Radio Corporation of America. Really, some of you may still know that brand, although they've been out of business for quite some time. But in their day, they were the dominant player in electronics in the United States. So, televisions, color televisions, radios, all of these electronic components were made by RCA. So those of you who are more of a vintage in age certainly know who RCA was or recognize that name. So this week we're going to read out of a book called, I'm getting some glare, there you go, American Business Since 1920, Thomas McGraw, and we're going to read the story of David Sarnoff and RCA. And the reason I think it's important is because, let's face it, consumerism today, our whole society, we're crazy for electronics. So electronics is a big part of consumer society today and has been a big part of consumer society all the way since the 1930s and 40s with the advent of radios. So Sarnoff was a talented businessman, and he described back in a speech in the 1940s to other executives that the new executive was going to be someone who could envision the development of products and bring them to market. So certainly, again, as we think about Steve Jobs, who we're going to read about in 2 or 3 weeks, Sarnoff is really the beginning of this high-tech executive. And really the story of RCA is nothing but success. They managed to not only tackle the delivery part of the media as far as owning radio stations and developing television and developing radio, but also the underlying technology, which was mostly vacuum tubes prior to the transistor. So this whole idea of a system, the cameras, the broadcasting equipment, and the networks themselves, all the way to the equipment in the household to receive broadcasts, whether it be radios or televisions, RCA had a piece of all of that. So this idea of a systems technology, which we've talked about before, certainly continues on with RCA. Now, the big thing with RCA was similar to Henry Ford, only maybe more tragic in the case of RCA, is that they failed to see what was coming down the pike as far as innovation is concerned. They had a strong R&D background, research and development, but they seemed to go off track when it came to transistors. So RCA sort of stayed with vacuum tube technology at a time when everyone else was moving towards the transistor. And even when RCA realized it was in trouble, their moves as far as a business were concerned were really not the best moves. Now, hindsight is easy. It's easy to be a Monday morning quarterback. And they did do some things right. They licensed a lot of their patents. They owned a lot of intellectual property, so they licensed a lot of that to other people, so at least they had a revenue stream coming in from their patent portfolio. But as far as the choices they made, and especially when they started to diversify in the 70s, it was really a disaster. So it's a fascinating story. Part of it tells you maybe what not to do in business, and the rest of it tells you how the electronics industry in the United States grew starting in the 1940s all the way to today. So if you didn't know who RCA was, you'll read about it and you'll learn something. If you did know who RCA was and you wondered whatever happened to that company, you'll learn more in the McGraw reading. So that's it for this week. Next week we're going to talk about Robert Noyce. Have a great week. Be safe. Bye-bye.